One night, one drink, one kiss that turned family into temptation. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Chicago penthouse like angry fists demanding entry. Sarah Martinez pressed her palm against the cool glass, watching the city lights blur into watercolor streaks 30 floors below. The champagne flute in her other hand trembled slightly. The expensive Dom Perignon, untouched and growing warm. She shouldn't be here. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to grab her coat and run back to her safe, predictable life in Lincoln Park, where the biggest drama was whether her 8-year-old daughter Emma had finished her math homework. But here she stood, in a dress that cost more than her monthly rent, borrowed from her best friend Maria, who worked as a stylist for Chicago's elite. The black silk clung to curves Sarah had almost forgotten she possessed, curves hidden beneath scrubs during her 12-hour nursing shifts at Northwestern Memorial. Tonight, she wasn't Sarah the single mom, Sarah the exhausted nurse who survived on coffee and determination. Tonight, she was someone else entirely, a woman who belonged in penthouses, who sipped champagne like it was water, who could look a billionaire in the eye without her knees going weak. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was here because of a lie, a beautiful, necessary lie that might just save her daughter's life. "You look like you're planning an escape route." The voice came from behind her, rich and amused, with just a hint of a Boston accent that money and boarding schools hadn't quite erased. Sarah's reflection in the window showed her composing her face into a mask of calm before she turned around. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing tales like this one. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. Marcus Blackwell stood 15 feet away, and even at that distance, Sarah felt the pull of his presence like gravity. At 35, he was everything the gossip columns claimed and more. Tall enough that she had to tilt her head back even in her borrowed Jimmy Choos, with dark hair that looked perfectly tousled despite the humidity, and green eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed facade. His tuxedo fit like it had been sewn directly onto his body, which it probably had been. This was a man who owned buildings, who made decisions that affected thousands of lives, who could buy and sell her entire world without breaking a sweat. He was also, according to every piece of research she'd done in the past week, potentially her daughter's only hope. "Just admiring the view," Sarah replied, proud that her voice came out steady. "It's quite something from up here." Marcus moved closer, his steps soundless on the marble floor. The penthouse around them buzzed with the kind of party that only happened when Chicago's wealthiest gathered to congratulate themselves on their latest charitable endeavors. The Blackwell Foundation's annual gala was legendary. Tickets started at $5,000, and that was just to get in the door. Sarah was here as the guest of Dr. Patricia Henley, the chief of pediatric oncology at Northwestern, who had taken pity on a desperate mother and agreed to this insane plan. "First time at one of these circus performances?" Marcus asked, stopping close enough that Sarah could catch his cologne. Something expensive and understated that probably cost more than her car payment. "Is it that obvious?" Sarah turned fully to face him, grateful for the years of dealing with difficult doctors and demanding patients that had taught her to project confidence she didn't feel. "Only because you're the first person I've seen tonight who looks like they're actually thinking instead of just performing." He gestured toward the crowd behind them with his whiskey glass. "See the woman in red by the piano? That's Victoria Westbrook. She spent the last hour telling anyone who'll listen about her latest art acquisition, while her husband's construction company uses materials that barely meet safety standards. And the gentleman holding court by the bar, Senator Richards, who voted against the health care bill last month while touting his support for children's causes tonight." Sarah followed his gaze, taking in the glittering crowd with new eyes. "You sound like you're not particularly fond of your own party." Marcus laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "These aren't my people, Ms. Sarah Martinez." She extended her hand, proud when it didn't shake. His palm was warm and calloused in places, surprising for a man who commanded boardrooms rather than construction sites. "Marcus Blackwell. And these people represent everything wrong with charity in America. They give just enough to feel good about themselves while ensuring nothing really changes. He held her hand a moment longer than necessary, his green eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "So what brings a nurse from Northwestern Memorial to my circus? Sarah Martinez." The words hit her like a physical blow. He knew. Of course he knew. Men like Marcus Blackwell didn't become billionaires by failing to research the people in their orbit. "Dr. Henley mentioned me?" Sarah's mind raced, trying to adjust her approach. The careful story she'd planned, about being interested in the Foundation's work, about wanting to understand how major philanthropy operated, crumbled before his knowing gaze. Patricia Henley is one of the few genuinely good people in this city. When she tells me she's bringing someone to meet me, someone who might help me understand what real need looks like, I pay attention. Marcus moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "She also mentioned you have a daughter, 8 years old." The carefully constructed walls Sarah had built around her emotions over the past 6 months began to crack. "Emma, she's been in and out of the hospital for leukemia. The treatments aren't working as well as we'd hoped, and the experimental treatment at Johns Hopkins that might help her isn't covered by insurance." Sarah closed her eyes, the weight of the past months pressing down on her like a physical thing. The sleepless nights researching treatments, the fights with insurance companies, the slowly dwindling savings account, the second job she'd taken cleaning offices after her hospital shifts. All of it had led to this moment, to standing in a penthouse with a man who could write a check for $200,000 like it was pocket change. Dr. Henley thought. "She suggested that perhaps your foundation." Sarah's voice caught, and she hated herself for the weakness. "Might write a check to ease your conscience about asking a stranger for money to save your child's life?" Marcus's voice wasn't unkind, but it wasn't gentle either. "Do you know how many requests I get like that every day, Sarah? How many desperate parents with sick children email, call, show up at my office?" The words were like knives, each one finding its target with surgical precision. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. "I'm sorry. This was a mistake. I should never have—" "Hundreds," Marcus continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Hundreds of requests from people who see me as nothing more than a bank account with legs. People who research my net worth, who study my donation history, who show up at events like this wearing borrowed dresses and desperation like perfume." Sarah's hand flew to her cheek as if she'd been slapped. "How dare you? You think I want to be here? You think I enjoy begging for my daughter's life from someone who clearly thinks I'm just another gold digger looking for a handout?" The emotion in her voice cut through the party noise like a blade, and several nearby conversations paused. Marcus took her elbow gently, guiding her toward a quieter corner of the room, past a sculpture that probably cost more than most people made in a year. "I think," he said quietly, "that you're terrified and exhausted and running out of options, and that makes you dangerous." "Dangerous?" Sarah jerked her arm free, her nursing training kicking in as she automatically cataloged exits and escape routes. "I'm a single mother who works 60-hour weeks to pay rent on a 1-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. The most dangerous thing about me is my overdue credit card bills." "You're dangerous," Marcus repeated, his green eyes fixed on her face, "because you're real. Because when you talk about your daughter, your entire being lights up like the 4th of July. Because you're not here to network, or be seen or add another charity board to your resume. You're here because you love someone more than your own pride, and that kind of love." He paused, running a hand through his dark hair. "That kind of love is the most dangerous thing in the world." The words hung between them like a live wire, charged with implications neither of them was ready to examine. Around them, the party continued its elaborate dance of wealth and influence, but Sarah felt like she and Marcus existed in a bubble of silence. "I don't understand," she said finally. Marcus drained his whiskey, his jaw tight. "My grandfather built this empire with that same kind of dangerous love. Love for my grandmother. Love for the family they created together. When she died of cancer 40 years ago, He started the foundation because he couldn't save her. But maybe he could save someone else's wife, someone else's mother. His eyes found hers again, and she saw something raw and unguarded there. I've been running that foundation for 10 years, Sarah, and I've never met anyone who reminded me why it exists in the first place. Until tonight. The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a warm blanket, hope and fear warring in her chest. Does that mean? It means I want to meet her, your daughter. I want to understand who I'm helping before I write a check that might not even work. Marcus pulled out his phone, fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. What's her favorite food? Pizza, Sarah answered automatically, thrown by the sudden shift. But she hasn't been able to keep much down lately, so we've been sticking to plain pasta and crackers. And does she like games, movies, books? She loves to read, advanced chapter books way above her grade level. And she's obsessed with marine biology, wants to be a marine biologist when she grows up. Sarah's voice softened as she talked about Emma, the way it always did. She can tell you more about octopuses than most adults know about anything. Marcus smiled, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him all evening. Smart kid. Gets that from her mom, I'm guessing. She's smarter than both of us combined, Sarah said fiercely. She explains her treatments to the younger kids in the oncology ward, helps them understand what's happening in terms they can grasp. The nurses call her Dr. Emma. Dr. Emma, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. I'd like to meet Dr. Emma if that's all right with you. Tomorrow, maybe. I could come by the hospital. Or if she's feeling up to it, maybe lunch somewhere she'd enjoy. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This was happening. After months of prayers and desperate schemes and sleepless nights, this was actually happening. She'd love that. But Mr. Blackwell, Marcus, I need you to know that Emma doesn't know about the experimental treatment. She doesn't know how bad things are. I've been trying to keep her childhood intact for as long as possible. Then we won't mention it. Tomorrow is just about getting to know a smart kid who likes octopuses and pizza. Marcus pulled a business card from his jacket pocket, but instead of handing it to her, he turned it over and wrote something on the back. My personal number. Call me when you're ready. Sarah took the card, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent an unexpected jolt of awareness through her, a reminder that underneath all the desperation and fear, she was still a woman who hadn't been touched by a man in over 2 years. I should go, she said, suddenly aware of how intimate their conversation had become, how the crowd around them had faded into background noise. Emma's with my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, and I don't like to leave her too long. Of course, Marcus stepped back, the professional mask sliding back into place. Sarah, whatever happens with the treatment, your daughter is lucky to have you. The words followed Sarah all the way home, through the rain-soaked streets of Chicago, through the cramped elevator of her apartment building, through the quiet ritual of checking on Emma, sleeping peacefully in the bed they shared, her bald head covered by a knit cap Sarah's mother had sent from San Antonio. They followed her as she carefully hung up the borrowed dress and washed off the borrowed confidence as she climbed into bed beside her daughter and listened to the steady sound of Emma's breathing. Tomorrow, everything would change. For better or worse, she'd set something in motion that couldn't be undone. What Sarah couldn't have known, as she finally drifted off to sleep, was that 30 floors above the city, Marcus Blackwell was standing at his own window, staring out at the same rain-soaked streets and thinking about dangerous love and smart little girls who wanted to study octopuses. He couldn't have known that his own carefully constructed world was about to be turned upside down by a woman in a borrowed dress and her remarkable daughter. Neither of them could have foreseen how one night, one conversation, one moment of genuine human connection would lead to something that would test everything they thought they knew about love, family, and the courage required to save the people who matter most. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical for Chicago in early November. Sarah woke to Emma's hand shaking her shoulder gently, a ritual they developed during the worst days of treatment, when Emma would wake up nauseous and need her mother's steady presence. Mom, I feel okay today, Emma announced. her voice carrying the cautious hope that had become their shared language. Good days were celebrated quietly, never taken for granted. Sarah sat up, automatically reaching to feel Emma's forehead for fever. Normal temperature, clear eyes, no signs of the crushing fatigue that had been Emma's constant companion for months. Okay enough for a field trip? Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really? Where are we going? Well, there's someone who'd like to meet you, a friend of Dr. Henley's who's interested in marine biology. Sarah had spent half the night crafting this explanation, trying to find the balance between truth and the kind of lie that protected rather than deceived. Is he a scientist? Emma was already pulling clothes from their shared dresser, moving with more energy than Sarah had seen in weeks. He's a lot of things, but he specifically wants to hear about octopuses from an expert. Sarah smiled as Emma did a little victory dance. Think you're up for lunch at Navy Pier? We could visit the aquarium afterward if you're feeling strong enough. The morning passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah called in sick to work, something she hated doing but couldn't avoid, and helped Emma choose an outfit that made her feel confident despite the physical changes the treatments had brought. Emma settled on her favorite jeans and a bright blue hoodie that brought out her eyes. The knit cap decorated with tiny embroidered fish that her aunt had made. Marcus had suggested meeting at Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, a choice that had surprised Sarah, until she realized he'd probably researched kid-friendly restaurants the same way he researched everything else. She arrived 10 minutes early with Emma in tow, both of them slightly breathless from the walk along the pier. "Mom, look at all the boats." Emma pressed her face against the restaurant window, watching the harbor with the intensity she brought to everything that captured her interest. Sarah was scanning the dining room when she spotted Marcus at a corner table, looking completely different from the night before. Gone was the tuxedo and the commanding presence. In its place was a man in jeans and a navy sweater, reading what looked like a children's book about marine life. He looked younger, more approachable, and when he glanced up and caught sight of them, his smile was genuine and warm. "Dr. Emma, I presume." Marcus stood as they approached, offering a slight bow that made Emma giggle. "I'm not really a doctor yet," Emma said seriously, "but the nurses call me that because I help explain things to the other kids." "That's exactly what doctors do," Marcus replied, pulling out chairs for both of them. "They help people understand complicated things. I'm Marcus, by the way. Your mom told me you're the world's leading expert on octopuses." Emma beamed, settling into her chair with the dignity of someone much older than 8. "Did you know that octopuses have 3 hearts and blue blood?" "I did not know that. Tell me more." For the next hour, Sarah watched in amazement as Marcus drew Emma out with questions that showed genuine interest and surprising knowledge. He listened intently as Emma explained how octopuses could change color and texture, how they could squeeze through any opening larger than their beak, how they were incredibly intelligent despite being invertebrates. "The mimic octopus is my favorite," Emma said around a bite of mac and cheese, the first meal Sarah had seen her finish in weeks. "It can imitate other sea creatures. Like, it can make itself look like a flat fish or a stingray or even a sea snake." "That's incredible," Marcus said. "So it's like the ultimate actor of the ocean." "Exactly." Emma's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "Mom says I'm like that sometimes. I can adapt to whatever I need to be." Sarah's heart clenched at the unconscious wisdom in her daughter's words. Emma had been adapting since her diagnosis, finding ways to be brave when she was scared, cheerful when she felt terrible, strong when her body was failing her. "That sounds like a very useful skill," Marcus said quietly, his eyes meeting Sarah's across the table. "Your mom is a pretty smart lady." "She's the smartest," Emma agreed loyally. "She works really hard to take care of people at the hospital, and then she comes home and takes care of me too. Sometimes I hear her studying at night when she thinks I'm sleeping." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. She'd been taking online courses toward her nurse practitioner degree, stealing hours when Emma was asleep to work toward a future that might never come. It was a form of hope, she supposed, believing that there would be a future where she and Emma could build something better together. "What are you studying?" Marcus asked. Pediatric oncology nursing, Sarah admitted. I want to specialize in helping kids like Emma and their families. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. Who better to understand what families are going through than someone who's lived it? The conversation continued through lunch, touching on everything from Emma's favorite books to her plans for when she was all better, a phrase that pierced Sarah's heart every time she heard it. Marcus was patient with Emma's questions about his work, explaining in simple terms how foundations operated, how they decided who to help. So you give money to people who need it? Emma asked. Sometimes. But the best help isn't always money. Sometimes it's connecting people with the right resources, or funding research that might help lots of people, or just making sure good people have what they need to do important work. Emma considered this seriously. Like how Mom helps people get better at the hospital. Exactly like that. After lunch, they walked through the Children's Museum and then to the Shed Aquarium, where Emma's energy seemed to multiply as she darted from exhibit to exhibit, pulling Marcus along to share her knowledge of each species they encountered. Sarah followed behind them, watching Marcus adapt to Emma's pace, listening to her rapid-fire explanations with the same attention he'd probably give to a board meeting. At the octopus exhibit, Emma pressed her hands against the glass and went completely still, watching the giant Pacific octopus move through its habitat with fluid grace. She's beautiful, Emma whispered. What makes you love them so much? Marcus asked, crouching beside Emma so they were at the same eye level. Emma was quiet for a long moment, unusual for her. When she spoke, her voice was soft and thoughtful. They're really smart, and they solve problems in ways that surprise everyone. And they're tough. They can survive in places where other animals can't. But they're also really vulnerable, you know? Like, they don't live very long, and they have to work really hard just to stay alive. Sarah's throat closed up, hearing her own daughter's situation reflected in her love for these creatures. Marcus must have heard it too, because when he looked back at Sarah, his expression was gentle and understanding. I think, he said carefully, that makes them pretty special. Yeah, Emma agreed. They are. They spent another hour at the aquarium before Emma's energy began to flag, a reminder that no matter how good a day was, her body was still fighting a war. Sarah noticed the subtle signs first, the way Emma started leaning against the exhibit walls, how her breathing became slightly labored, the pale tinge around her mouth that meant exhaustion was setting in. Ready to head home, sweetheart? Sarah asked gently. Emma nodded, not arguing the way she might have on a normal day. Marcus seemed to pick up on the shift immediately, suggesting they grab hot chocolate for the road and helping Emma with her jacket without making a big production of it. As they walked back toward the parking garage, Emma slipped her hand into Marcus's, a gesture so natural and trusting that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you for today, Emma said simply. It was really fun. Thank you for teaching me about octopuses. Marcus replied, I learned more today than I have in years. At the car, Emma hugged Marcus goodbye, another spontaneous gesture that spoke volumes about her comfort with him. As Sarah buckled Emma into the passenger seat, she could see her daughter fighting sleep, the way she always did when she didn't want a good day to end. Marcus walked around to Sarah's side of the car, his hands shoved deep in his pockets against the November cold. She's remarkable, he said quietly. She is. Sarah's voice was thick with emotion. I know you didn't make any promises about the treatment, and I understand if… Sarah. Marcus's hand covered hers on the car door handle. I'm going to make some calls tonight. The experimental treatment at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Martinez's team. Right? Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. I'll have my assistant contact them first thing Monday morning. We'll get the process started. Marcus's green eyes were serious, determined. But I want you to understand something. This isn't charity. This isn't me writing a check to make myself feel better. Then what is it? Marcus glanced at Emma, who had finally surrendered to sleep in the passenger seat, her head pillowed against the window. It's an investment, in her future and yours, in the kind of world where smart kids who love octopuses get the chance to become marine biologists. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Sarah wanted to thank him, to find words adequate for what he was offering, but language felt insufficient. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "The treatment timeline. If Emma qualifies, she'd need to be in Baltimore for at least 3 months, maybe longer. That's a significant disruption to your lives." Sarah had researched every aspect of the experimental protocol. She knew about the extended timeline, the need for one parent to remain with the child, the costs beyond just the medical treatment itself. "I've thought about that. I can take a leave of absence from work, maybe find a short-term rental near the hospital." "What if I told you there was another option?" Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like real estate listings. The foundation maintains a few properties for exactly these situations, places where families can stay during extended treatments. There's a townhouse about 10 minutes from Johns Hopkins, fully furnished, all expenses covered. Sarah stared at the photos on his phone. A beautiful 3-bedroom home with a small garden, bright rooms filled with comfortable furniture, a kitchen that looked like something from a magazine. "I can't accept that. It's too much." "It's not about what you can accept, Sarah. It's about what Emma needs." Marcus's voice was firm, but not unkind. "She's going to be dealing with intensive treatments in an unfamiliar place. Having a stable, comfortable home base isn't luxury. It's medical necessity." Looking at her sleeping daughter, Sarah felt the last of her resistance crumble. Emma deserved every possible advantage in this fight, even if it meant accepting help that made Sarah uncomfortable. "Okay," she said quietly. "If Emma qualifies for the treatment, we'll accept the housing assistance. But I want to keep track of every expense. When she's better, when she's a famous marine biologist, she can pay it forward." Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "Deal. Though something tells me she'll find ways to pay it forward long before she's famous." That evening, after Emma had gone to bed early, exhausted from their adventure but happy in a way Sarah hadn't seen in months, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table with her laptop, researching the experimental treatment one more time. She'd memorized every detail, every statistic, every potential side effect. But tonight she found herself reading patient testimonials, stories of other families who had made this same impossible journey. Her phone rang at 9 o'clock. Marcus's name on the caller ID. "I hope it's not too late," he said when she answered. "Not at all. Emma's been asleep for an hour." Which is actually early for her. She's usually too wound up to settle down. "Good tired or bad tired?" Sarah smiled at the question, recognizing the concern of someone who had already begun to care about Emma's well-being. "Good tired. The best kind. She's been talking nonstop about the octopus exhibit and how smart you are to ask all the right questions." She made it easy. "I've never met a kid with such passion for learning." Marcus paused, and Sarah could hear papers rustling in the background. "I wanted to update you on the treatment situation. I spoke with Dr. Martinez at Johns Hopkins tonight. Yes, on a Saturday evening because apparently saving children doesn't follow office hours." Sarah's heart hammered. "What did he say?" "Emma fits the preliminary criteria perfectly. Her age, diagnosis, treatment history, current health status, everything aligns with what they're looking for." Marcus's voice carried barely contained excitement. "They want to schedule a comprehensive evaluation as soon as possible, ideally within the next 2 weeks." The room seemed to spin around Sarah. After months of dead ends and insurance denials, things were suddenly moving at lightning speed. 2 weeks? But I need to arrange time off work and Emma's current treatment schedule." "Already handled. I spoke with Dr. Henley and she's coordinating with Johns Hopkins to ensure Emma's current care transitions smoothly. As for your work situation, the foundation has relationships with several hospitals that provide temporary staffing. Northwestern will have coverage, and your position will be protected under FMLA." Sarah sank into her chair, overwhelmed by the efficiency with which Marcus had dismantled every logistical obstacle she'd been dreading. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me, Sarah. Just focus on getting Emma ready for the biggest fight of her life." The words sobered them both. For all the hope and excitement, they were talking about experimental treatment for a reason, because conventional approaches had failed, because time was running out, because this was quite literally Emma's last best chance. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" Sarah's voice was quiet, uncertain. "Anything. Why are you doing all this? I mean, I understand about the foundation and helping sick children, but this feels like something more, something personal." The silence stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I told you about my grandmother last night, how my grandfather started the foundation after she died of cancer. What I didn't mention is that she was 28 when she was diagnosed. She had a 6-year-old daughter, my Aunt Rebecca, who used to spend hours at the hospital reading to other sick kids while my grandmother was getting treatment." Sarah's breath caught. Emma's age. Emma's age. And Rebecca grew up to become a pediatric oncologist, driven by watching her mother fight and lose a battle that today would be completely winnable. Marcus's voice grew stronger, more determined. "I've spent years writing checks and funding research and hosting galas, but I've never had the chance to directly impact the life of one child whose story reminded me so much of my family's history." "What happened to your Aunt Rebecca?" "She runs a children's cancer center in Seattle, still reads to her patients every Friday afternoon, 40 years later." Marcus laughed softly. "She's going to want to meet Emma, by the way. I may have already sent her some of today's photos." The idea that Emma's story was already rippling outward, connecting with other people who understood the strange combination of heartbreak and hope that defined their world, felt both overwhelming and comforting. "There's one more thing," Marcus continued. "The evaluation process is going to be intensive. Multiple days of testing, consultations, scans. It's not going to be easy for either of you." "We can handle it," Sarah said automatically. The response that had gotten her through everything from Emma's first terrifying symptoms to the endless insurance battles. "I know you can, but you don't have to handle it alone anymore." The words settled over Sarah like a warm blanket, offering a comfort she hadn't even realized she was craving. For months she'd carried the weight of Emma's illness in isolation, making decisions and fighting battles without backup, without anyone to share the fear and exhaustion that had become her constant companions. "I'm not sure I know how to accept help," she admitted. "Then it's a good thing Emma's such a quick learner," Marcus said gently. "She can teach you." After they hung up, Sarah found herself standing in the doorway of Emma's room, watching her daughter sleep. Emma looked so small in the bed they shared, her body diminished by months of treatment, but her spirit somehow still blazing bright. Tomorrow, Sarah would have to tell Emma about the experimental treatment, about another hospital and more tests and the possibility of hope. For tonight, though, she just watched her daughter breathe and allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they weren't fighting this battle alone anymore. The phone rang again at 10:30, startling Sarah from her research spiral about Johns Hopkins success rates and patient protocols. "I know it's late," Marcus said without preamble, "but I wanted to ask you something, and it seemed too important to wait until tomorrow." "What is it?" "Would you have dinner with me? Just the two of us, I mean. Tomorrow night, after Emma's asleep." The question caught Sarah completely off guard. In all her desperate planning for how to approach Marcus Blackwell, she'd never considered the possibility that he might be interested in her as anything other than a desperate mother seeking help for her child. "I don't understand," she said carefully. "Today at the aquarium, when Emma was explaining how octopuses adapt to survive, I kept thinking about how much she's like her mother, how you've adapted to circumstances that would break most people, how you found ways to be everything she needs while still pursuing your own dreams." Marcus's voice was quiet, thoughtful. "I'd like to get to know the woman behind the mother, Sarah, if you're comfortable with that." Sarah's first instinct was to say no, to keep the boundaries clear between Marcus the benefactor and Sarah the grateful recipient. But underneath that practical concern was something else, a flutter of attraction and interest that had nothing to do with experimental treatments and everything to do with the way Marcus had listened to Emma's octopus lecture, like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever heard. "What did you have in mind?" she heard herself asking. "Nothing fancy. There's a little Italian place in Little Italy that makes the best osso buco in the city. Quiet, comfortable, the kind of place where we can talk without feeling like we're performing." Sarah knew the area he meant, a neighborhood of family-owned restaurants and cozy bistros that catered to locals rather than tourists. The kind of place where she and Emma sometimes went for special occasions, where the owners remembered your name and your usual order. "I'll need to arrange for Mrs. Chen to stay with Emma," Sarah said, surprising herself with the acceptance implicit in her words. "Of course. 7:30? I can pick you up, or we can meet there if you prefer." "I'll meet you there." Sarah needed the option to leave if things got complicated, to maintain some control over a situation that already felt like it was spinning beyond her grasp. "Perfect. It's called Nonna's on Taylor Street." "And Sarah?" "Yes. This isn't about Emma's treatment. That's happening regardless. This is just about us." The words stayed with Sarah long after she hung up, following her through her evening routine and into her dreams. For the first time in months, she fell asleep thinking about something other than medical bills and treatment protocols. She fell asleep thinking about the way Marcus's eyes had lit up when Emma laughed, the easy way he'd adapted to an 8-year-old's pace and interests, the careful gentleness in his voice when he talked about her daughter. She fell asleep thinking about the possibility that maybe, in the middle of the worst chapter of her life, something unexpectedly beautiful might be beginning. Sunday morning brought another good day for Emma, who woke up energetic and full of questions about their plans. Sarah had decided to wait until after the Johns Hopkins evaluation was confirmed before telling Emma about the experimental treatment, but she did share the news that they might be taking a trip to Baltimore soon. "For my treatment?" Emma asked with the matter-of-fact acceptance that never failed to humble Sarah. "Maybe. There are some doctors there who specialize in exactly what you have. They want to meet you and see if they can help." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Will Marcus come with us?" The question hit Sarah sideways. "Why would you think that, sweetheart?" "Because he cares about us now. I can tell." Emma's 8-year-old logic was both simple and profound. "And he knows about hospitals and helping people get better." Out of the mouths of babes. Sarah realized that Emma had picked up on the shift in their circumstances with the intuitive awareness that serious illness often brought to children, a premature understanding of adult complexities that broke Sarah's heart and amazed her in equal measure. "Marcus is helping us, yes, but the doctors in Baltimore are the ones who would take care of you." "I know that, Mom. But Marcus makes you smile different." "Different how?" Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "Like you're happy even when you're not thinking about being happy. Like how I feel when I'm watching the octopuses." Sarah's chest tightened with emotion. She'd been so focused on hiding her fear and exhaustion from Emma that she hadn't realized her daughter was also monitoring her happiness, looking for signs that her mother's world consisted of more than medical appointments and financial worry. "He's a good friend," Sarah said carefully. "Good friends are important," Emma agreed, "especially when scary things are happening." The day passed quietly, with Emma strong enough for a walk to the nearby park, and even a few minutes on the swings before fatigue set in. As evening approached, Sarah found herself growing nervous about dinner with Marcus, changing clothes twice before settling on a simple dress that was her own, rather than borrowed. Mrs. Chen arrived at 7, armed with Emma's favorite herbal tea and a new library book about marine ecosystems. Emma was settled comfortably in bed, tired from their active day but in good spirits. "You look nice, mija," Mrs. Chen said in her mix of English and Spanish, the endearment she'd used for both Sarah and Emma since they'd moved into the building 2 years ago. "It's good you're having dinner with a friend." "It's not a date," Sarah said quickly. Mrs. Chen's knowing smile suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but she just shooed Sarah toward the door with instructions to have fun and not worry about the time. Nonna's was exactly as Marcus had described. A small, warm restaurant tucked between a bakery and a used bookstore, with red checkered tablecloths and the kind of worn wooden floors that spoke of decades of family meals and celebrations. The smell of garlic and fresh bread enveloped Sarah the moment she walked in, making her stomach growl in a way that reminded her she'd been too nervous to eat much all day. Marcus was already seated at a corner table, studying the menu with the same focused attention he'd given to Emma's octopus lecture. He looked up when she approached, his face breaking into a smile that made her pulse quicken, despite her best efforts to keep this interaction professional. "You found it," he said, standing to pull out her chair. "GPS is a wonderful thing," Sarah replied, settling into her seat and trying not to notice how his dark blue sweater brought out the green in his eyes. Emma was very specific in her instructions to try the bread. "Smart kid. The bread here is legendary." Marcus signaled the waiter, a man in his 60s who moved with the comfortable efficiency of someone who'd been serving these tables for decades. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwell," the waiter said warmly. "The usual?" "Please, Tony, and whatever the lady would like." Sarah ordered wine, something she rarely indulged in but felt appropriate for the occasion. As Tony bustled away, she found herself studying Marcus across the candlelit table, noting details she'd been too overwhelmed to register before. The laugh lines around his eyes, the small scar on his left hand, the way he fidgeted slightly with his water glass, nervous habits that humanized him in a way that surprised her. "You're staring," he observed, not unkindly. "Sorry, I'm trying to figure you out. What's the current theory?" Sarah considered this, taking a sip of the wine Tony had delivered with practiced discretion. "I think you're not quite what you appear to be." "In what way?" "Yesterday at the aquarium, watching you with Emma. You weren't performing or trying to impress anyone. You were just genuinely interested in what she had to say." Sarah paused as Tony delivered their appetizer, a plate of bruschetta that smelled like heaven. Most adults humor kids that age, but they don't really listen. You listened. Marcus was quiet for a moment, breaking apart a piece of bread with careful precision. "I was an only child, raised mostly by nannies and boarding school teachers. I never had much exposure to kids, never really understood what people meant when they talked about the wisdom of children." He met her eyes across the table. "Emma taught me more about resilience and joy in one afternoon than I've learned in years of adult conversations." "She has that effect on people," Sarah said softly. "Sometimes I think her illness has made her more aware of what matters, more present in each moment than most adults ever learned to be." "Is that how you've made peace with it? Focusing on what she's gained rather than what she's lost?" The question was perceptive and challenging in a way that made Sarah pause. Most people either avoided talking about Emma's illness entirely or offered empty platitudes about everything happening for a reason. Marcus was asking her to examine the actual mechanics of how she survived each day. "I don't know if I've made peace with it," Sarah admitted. "Some days I think I have, and then something will happen. She'll mention a book she wants to read when she's older, or talk about college plans, and I'll realize I'm holding my breath, terrified that there might not be enough time for all the things she wants to do. That's not making peace with it. That's carrying it with grace." The words hit Sarah with unexpected force, tears pricking her eyes despite her best efforts to maintain composure. "I don't feel graceful most of the time. I feel like I'm barely holding everything together, like one more setback might break me completely." Marcus reached across the table, his hand covering hers with gentle pressure. "But you don't break. You adapt, like Emma said. You find new ways to be strong." "Because I have to. Because she needs me to." "No," Marcus said firmly. "Because that's who you are. Emma didn't create your strength, Sarah. She revealed it." Their main courses arrived, osso buco for him, seafood risotto for her, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Marcus told her about his travels, the places he'd visited for business that had surprised him with their beauty. Sarah shared stories about Emma's precocious observations, The way she'd convinced her entire second-grade class that octopuses were the most fascinating creatures on Earth. What was she like before the diagnosis? Marcus asked as they shared tiramisu, the question careful and respectful. Sarah smiled, remembering. A force of nature. She taught herself to read when she was 4, not because anyone pushed her, but because she was desperate to know what all those books contained. She'd wake up at 5 in the morning to watch nature documentaries before school, taking notes in a little notebook like she was conducting research. She sounds exactly the same. That's what's so remarkable about her. The illness changed her body, but it didn't change her essential self. If anything, it intensified who she already was. Curious, empathetic, determined to understand everything about the world around her. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his fork idle in the dessert. My grandmother was like that. Even when she was dying, she was more concerned about making sure my grandfather would be okay, that my aunt would finish school, that the family would stay connected. He met Sarah's eyes across the table. Dangerous love, like I said, the kind that makes people fight harder than they ever thought possible. Is that what this is about? Your grandmother's memory? Partly. Marcus hesitated, seeming to weigh his words carefully. But if I'm being honest, it's also about you. About the way you talk about Emma. The way you've built your entire life around giving her the best possible chance, while still maintaining your own dreams and identity. I've never met anyone who carries that kind of responsibility with such dignity. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm just doing what any parent would do. No, you're not. You're doing what the best parents do. The ones who understand that loving a child means preparing them for a world you might not be part of forever. Marcus's voice was gentle but insistent. You're teaching Emma how to be strong without teaching her to be hard. How to hope without teaching her to be naive. That's not just parenting, that's artistry. The words settled over Sarah like a benediction, validation she hadn't realized she desperately needed. For months, she'd questioned every decision, wondered if she was doing enough, being enough, providing enough. To have someone whose opinion was beginning to matter more than she wanted to admit, tell her she was succeeding felt like oxygen after holding her breath underwater. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing us. Really seeing us, not just our circumstances. Marcus paid the check despite Sarah's protests, and they walked out into the crisp November evening together. The streets of Little Italy were quieter than they'd been during the day, the family restaurants and cafes settling into the peaceful rhythm of a Sunday night. I'll walk you to your car, Marcus offered. I took the L, Sarah admitted. Parking down here is impossible, and I didn't want to worry about it. Then I'll drive you home. Sarah started to protest, but something in Marcus's expression stopped her. Not pushiness or assumption, but genuine concern about her traveling alone at night across a city that could be unpredictable after dark. Okay, she said simply. Marcus's car was a surprise. Not the flashy sports car or oversized SUV she might have expected, but a practical sedan that was clean and well-maintained, but unremarkable. The interior smelled faintly of coffee, and the leather seats were worn comfortable rather than showroom pristine. Not what you expected? Marcus asked, noticing her survey of the vehicle. I don't know what I expected, Sarah replied honestly. Maybe something more. Obvious? Marcus laughed, pulling out into traffic with the easy competence of someone who'd navigated Chicago streets for years. I save the obvious displays for business situations where intimidation is useful. For everything else, I prefer to blend in. The drive to Sarah's building took 15 minutes through neighborhoods that shifted from trendy to working class to somewhere in between. Sarah found herself pointing out landmarks. The community center where Emma had taken swimming lessons before her diagnosis. The library branch where they spent Saturday mornings. The small park where Emma had first announced her intention to become a marine biologist. You've built a good life here, Marcus observed as he pulled up in front of her building. We've built a life, Sarah corrected. Emma's as much a part of creating our world as I am. Marcus turned off the engine, his hands resting on the steering wheel. "Can I ask you something that might be presumptuous?" Sarah's pulse quickened. "Go ahead." "When this is over, when Emma's in remission and you're both back in Chicago, would you consider letting me be part of your lives? Not as a benefactor or a foundation representative, but as someone who cares about both of you." The question hung between them, loaded with implications and possibilities that Sarah wasn't sure she was ready to examine. Her life for the past 8 months had been narrowed to the essential: Emma's health, their basic survival, the fight to secure treatment. The idea of expanding that world to include someone else, especially someone whose feelings were becoming increasingly complicated, felt both terrifying and appealing. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know what our lives will look like on the other side of this. I don't know if I'll be the same person, or if Emma will be the same kid, or what any of it means." "That's fair," Marcus said quietly. "But whatever version of yourselves you become, I'd like the chance to know them." Sarah studied his profile in the dim light from the street lamps, noting the sincerity in his expression, the careful way he was giving her space to respond without pressure. "Ask me again when Emma's better," she said finally, "when we know how the story ends." Marcus smiled, an expression of patient hope that transformed his entire face. "Deal." He walked her to the building entrance, waiting until she was safely inside before getting back in his car. Sarah watched from the lobby window as he drove away, his taillights disappearing into the Chicago night. Upstairs, she found Mrs. Chen reading in the living room, while Emma slept peacefully in the bedroom they shared. "How was dinner, Mija?" Mrs. Chen asked, gathering her things with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood the rhythms of a household dealing with serious illness. "Complicated," Sarah admitted. Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly. "The best things usually are. Emma had a good evening. We read 2 chapters of her new book, and she told me all about the octopuses. That child's mind never stops working." After Mrs. Chen left, Sarah stood in Emma's doorway, watching her daughter sleep, processing the events of a day that had shifted something fundamental in their world. 24 hours ago, she'd been a single mother fighting a losing battle against time and circumstance. Tonight, she was part of something larger, a network of care and possibility that included experimental treatments and foundation resources, and a man whose interest in her family felt both professional and deeply personal. The phone buzzed with a text message. "Thank you for dinner. Sweet dreams to both of you. M." Sarah smiled despite herself, typing back, "Thank you for everything. Talk tomorrow." 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again before resolving into, "Looking forward to it." Such simple words, but they carried the weight of promise and patience, of understanding that whatever was developing between them would have to unfold carefully, around the edges of Emma's treatment and recovery. Sarah fell asleep that night thinking about experimental protocols and comfortable silences, about dangerous love and the courage required to hope for futures that seemed almost impossible to imagine. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Dr. Henley called at 7 a.m., her voice tight with excitement and urgency. "Sarah, I just heard from Dr. Martinez at Johns Hopkins. They've had a cancellation in their experimental protocol. Another patient had to withdraw due to complications with their current treatment. If Emma can be there by Thursday for the initial evaluation, they can fast-track her into the program." Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her numb fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor. Emma looked up from her cereal with concern, picking up on her mother's shock immediately. "Thursday? As in, this Thursday? 3 days from now?" "I know it's sudden, but Sarah, this opportunity might not come again. The waiting list for this protocol is months long, and Emma's condition." "Doctor." Henley's voice trailed off, but Sarah understood the unspoken urgency. Emma's latest scans had shown progression of her disease despite aggressive treatment. They were running out of time and options, and everyone involved in her care knew it. "We'll be there," Sarah said firmly, her mind already racing through the logistics. "Whatever it takes." After she hung up, Sarah sat Emma down for the conversation she'd been dreading, explaining about the experimental treatment, about traveling to Baltimore, about the possibility of hope wrapped in the reality of risk. Emma listened with the serious attention she brought to all important discussions, asking thoughtful questions about the treatment protocol, about how long they'd be away, about what would happen to their apartment and her school. "Will Marcus visit us in Baltimore?" Emma asked when Sarah had finished explaining. "I don't know, sweetheart. He's been very helpful getting everything arranged, but he has his own life and work here in Chicago." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I think he'll visit. I think he cares about us too much to just say goodbye." The wisdom in her daughter's observation took Sarah's breath away. Emma had picked up on the shift in Marcus's involvement, the way it had evolved from professional obligation to personal investment. Sarah called Marcus as soon as Emma left for what might be her last day of school for several months. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for her call. "How fast can you pack?" were his first words. "You already know about Thursday? Dr. Martinez called me 20 minutes ago. I'm looking at flights right now. There's a 2 o'clock departure that gets you to Baltimore with time to settle in before the hospital appointments start on Friday morning." Sarah felt tears of gratitude and overwhelm threaten. "Marcus, I can't let you pay for—" "It's not about what you can let me do, Sarah. It's about what needs to happen." His voice was gentle but firm. "Emma's getting this chance, and you're both going to be as comfortable and supported as possible while she fights for her life. I don't know how to thank you. You don't thank me. You focus on Emma and let me handle the logistics." Marcus paused, and Sarah could hear papers rustling, phone calls being made in the background. "There's something else. I'm flying out with you." Sarah's heart stopped. "What?" "Just for the first few days to make sure you're settled, to be there during the initial evaluation process. I know it's presumptuous, but—" "Yes," Sarah interrupted, surprising them both with the speed of her response. "Yes, yes. We'd like you there. Emma will be thrilled, and I—" Sarah took a shaky breath. "I could use a friend." The rest of Monday and Tuesday passed in a blur of packing, arranging, and preparing. Sarah's supervisor at Northwestern was incredibly supportive, fast-tracking her FMLA paperwork and ensuring her position would be protected. Emma's school put together a packet of materials so she could keep up with her studies, and her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, organized a send-off card signed by the entire second grade. Mrs. Chen wept openly when they said goodbye, pressing a bag of Emma's favorite tea and a hand-knitted scarf into Sarah's hands. The neighbors they'd barely spoken to appeared in the hallway with offers of help, promises to check their apartment, expressions of hope and support that reminded Sarah they weren't as alone in the world as she sometimes felt. Marcus appeared at their door Wednesday evening with dinner from Emma's favorite Thai restaurant and a small wrapped gift. "Early birthday present," he explained when Emma looked at the package with curiosity. "I know your birthday isn't for another month, but I thought you might want to have this for the trip." Emma carefully unwrapped the gift, revealing a beautiful leather journal with Dr. Emma's research notes embossed on the cover in silver letters. Inside, Marcus had written, "For all your discoveries, past, present, and future. The octopuses are just the beginning." Emma hugged the journal to her chest, tears shining in her eyes. "This is the most perfect present anyone's ever given me. I'm glad you like it. Maybe you can write about your adventure in Baltimore. Document what it's like to be part of cutting-edge medical research." As they ate dinner together, Sarah watched the easy interaction between Marcus and Emma, noting how comfortable they'd become with each other in just a few days. Emma showed Marcus her packed suitcase, explaining her strategy for bringing exactly the right books and stuffed animals for an extended hospital stay. Marcus listened with the same focused attention he'd shown at the aquarium, asking questions that showed he understood this was as much about emotional preparation as physical logistics. "Are you scared?" Marcus asked Emma gently as they were finishing their pad thai. Emma considered the question with her usual seriousness. "A little, but mostly excited. Mom says the doctors in Baltimore are the smartest in the world at helping kids like me get better." "They are, and you're going to teach them a thing or two about being brave." That night, after Emma was asleep and their suitcases were packed by the door, Sarah and Marcus sat together on her small couch, the weight of what lay ahead settling between them like a physical presence. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked quietly. Sarah laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Is anyone ever ready to bet their child's life on experimental medicine?" "Probably not, but you're as ready as anyone could be." Marcus shifted to face her more fully. "Sarah, I want you to know something before we get on that plane tomorrow." "What's that?" "Whatever happens in Baltimore, whether the treatment works perfectly or whether it doesn't work at all, you've given Emma the best possible chance. You've fought for her with everything you have, and that matters regardless of the outcome." The words Sarah had been holding back for months finally broke free. "What if it's not enough? What if I've put her through all this hope and travel and disruption for nothing? What if she gets sicker, or the side effects are worse than the disease, or—" Marcus's arms came around her, pulling her against his chest with gentle firmness. "Then you'll have tried everything possible to save your daughter's life, and that will be enough because it has to be enough." Sarah let herself sink into his embrace, crying the tears she'd been saving for private moments when Emma couldn't see her break apart. Marcus held her without trying to fix or minimize her fears, simply offering the steadiness of his presence, while she finally let herself feel the full weight of what they were about to attempt. "I'm so scared," she whispered against his shoulder. "I know. But you're not scared alone anymore." They sat together until Sarah's tears ran dry, and her breathing evened out, until the practical nurse in her reasserted itself, and she started mentally reviewing Emma's medications and appointment schedule. Marcus made no move to leave, seeming to understand that she needed his quiet presence more than she needed space to process. "Marcus," Sarah said as they finally prepared to call it a night. "Yeah? Thank you for all of it, but especially for being here." Marcus kissed the top of her head, a gesture so natural and comforting that Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, some wall she'd built around her heart beginning to soften, despite her best efforts to keep things professional. "Wouldn't be anywhere else," he said simply. Thursday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that made Chicago look like a postcard. Emma woke up energetic and excited, chattering about the airplane ride and wondering if she'd be able to see the ocean from Baltimore. At the airport, Marcus handled their boarding passes and luggage with the efficiency of someone who traveled frequently, making sure Emma had a window seat and that Sarah had everything she needed within easy reach. Emma was fascinated by the takeoff, pressing her face to the small window and providing running commentary about the city shrinking beneath them. "Look, Mom, there's the lake, and I can see the tall buildings getting smaller and smaller like we're flying into the sky itself." Sarah watched her daughter's wonder and felt her heart clench with love and terror in equal measure. This might be Emma's last airplane ride, her last adventure, her last chance to see the world from above. Or it might be the first of many trips, the beginning of a life full of travel and discovery, and all the experiences Sarah had dreamed of for her brilliant, curious daughter. Marcus seemed to pick up on Sarah's emotional state, his hand finding hers between their seats and squeezing gently. The gesture was subtle enough that Emma didn't notice, but it anchored Sarah to the present moment, to the reality that whatever lay ahead, they were facing it together. The flight to Baltimore took just under 2 hours, and Emma remained fascinated by every aspect of the experience. The clouds outside her window, the tiny packets of airline snacks, the way her ears popped during descent. Her energy and excitement were infectious, drawing smiles from flight attendants and fellow passengers who couldn't help but respond to her enthusiasm. At Baltimore Washington International Airport, they were met by a driver Marcus had arranged, a kind woman named Grace who specialized in transporting families to Johns Hopkins for medical treatment. "You must be Dr. Emma," Grace said with a warm smile. "I've heard all about your octopus expertise." Emma beamed, settling into the car with easy confidence. "Did you know that octopuses can taste with their arms? They have chemoreceptors that work like taste buds." As they drove through Baltimore toward the Foundation's townhouse, Sarah found herself studying the city with new eyes. This would be their home for the next several months, the place where Emma's future would be decided. The neighborhoods they passed were a mix of historic charm and urban renewal. Brick row houses with colorful doors standing alongside modern developments and trendy restaurants. The townhouse Marcus had arranged was everything the online photos had promised and more. Located on a quiet street just 10 minutes from the hospital, it was a beautifully restored 3-bedroom home with hardwood floors, comfortable furniture, and a small garden that Emma immediately claimed for her outdoor reading spot. "This is like a fairy tale house," Emma announced, running from room to room with more energy than Sarah had seen from her in weeks. "Mom, look at this kitchen. We can actually cook real meals." Sarah stood in the center of the main living area, overwhelmed by the generosity of what Marcus had provided. The house was stocked with groceries, the refrigerator humming with Emma's favorite foods, the bookshelves filled with age-appropriate novels and several volumes about marine biology. "Marcus," she said quietly as Emma explored upstairs, "this is too much." "It's exactly enough," he replied firmly. "Emma needs a stable, comfortable base while she's fighting the hardest battle of her life. You need a place where you can take care of her without worrying about logistics or expenses." That evening, after Emma had claimed the smallest bedroom with its view of the garden and Sarah had unpacked their belongings into the master suite, the three of them sat together in the living room planning their Baltimore adventure. Marcus had printed out maps of the city, restaurant recommendations, lists of kid-friendly activities for Emma's good days. He'd also compiled a comprehensive guide to Johns Hopkins, parking information, cafeteria locations, the names of key staff members they'd be working with. "Tomorrow's the big day," Marcus said as Emma curled up between them on the comfortable sofa. "Are you ready to meet the doctors, Dr. Emma?" "I'm ready," Emma said with quiet confidence. "I've been preparing my whole life for this, even if I didn't know it." The wisdom in her words silenced all three of them. Emma had been preparing, through every treatment, every setback, every day of fighting her body's betrayal with courage and curiosity. Tomorrow would be the culmination of everything that had brought them to this moment. As they got Emma ready for bed in her new room, Sarah felt the weight of possibility and terror that had become her constant companion over the past few months. Tomorrow, they would find out if experimental medicine could save her daughter's life. Tomorrow, they would begin the final phase of a journey that had already changed all of them, in ways they were only beginning to understand. Marcus lingered after Emma was asleep, helping Sarah organize the medical records and insurance paperwork they'd need for the next day's appointments. "How are you holding up?" he asked as they sat together at the dining room table, documents spread between them like battle plans. "Ask me tomorrow night," Sarah replied, "after we know what we're really dealing with." Marcus reached across the table, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Whatever the doctors say tomorrow, whatever the protocol entails, you don't have to face it alone. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Always." Sarah took a deep breath, gathering courage for a question that had been building in her mind since their first conversation at the gala. "Is this real? What's happening between us, is it real, or is it just circumstance and gratitude and the intensity of everything we're going through?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns across her knuckles. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful and certain. "I think it started as circumstance. I met a desperate mother who reminded me why my family's foundation exists. But Sarah, what I feel for you now, what I felt watching you with Emma at the aquarium, what I felt holding you last night when you finally let yourself cry, that's not circumstance. That's not gratitude. That's something I've never experienced before." "What is it then?" Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "I think it's dangerous love, the kind my grandfather felt for my grandmother. The kind that makes people fight harder than they ever thought possible." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, not of sadness, but of recognition. Because she felt it too. This connection that had grown from desperation into something deeper. Something that had nothing to do with foundation grants and everything to do with the way Marcus listened to Emma's octopus lectures like they were the most important presentations he'd ever heard. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of the treatment? Of everything. Of hoping too much, of not hoping enough, of letting you matter this much when everything else is so uncertain. DeMarcus brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. Then let me be scared with you. Let me hope with you. Let me matter, Sarah, because you already matter to me more than I know how to explain. That night, Sarah lay in the comfortable bed in their temporary home, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a Baltimore neighborhood settling into sleep. Down the hall, Emma was peaceful in her borrowed room, surrounded by her favorite books and stuffed animals, preparing in her dreams for the battle that would begin tomorrow. And for the first time in months, Sarah fell asleep, not with fear, but with something that felt almost like peace. Tomorrow would bring answers, good or bad. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of Emma's last, best chance for a future full of octopuses and college plans and all the dreams that 8-year-olds carry in their hearts. But tonight, they were safe and together and cared for by someone who saw them as more than their circumstances. Someone who had chosen to fight alongside them, not out of obligation, but out of love. Tonight, that was enough. The future could wait until morning. As dawn broke over Baltimore on Friday morning, painting the row house walls in shades of gold and amber, Sarah woke to the sound of Emma humming in the kitchen. She found her daughter at the breakfast table, fully dressed, and writing intently in the research journal Marcus had given her. "Morning, sweetheart, you're up early." "I wanted to document everything," Emma explained seriously, showing Sarah the neat handwriting that filled the first page. "Day 1 of the Great Baltimore Adventure. I wrote about the airplane and the house and how Marcus made sure we had everything we needed." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion as she read Emma's words, noting how her daughter had framed this journey not as a medical crisis, but as an adventure, a story worth recording and remembering. Marcus appeared in the doorway, looking surprisingly domestic in jeans and a sweater, carrying coffee from a nearby shop and a bag of what smelled like fresh bagels. "I thought you might want real coffee before we head to the hospital," he said, handing Sarah a cup that was exactly the right temperature and perfectly prepared with cream and sugar. "You remember how I take my coffee?" "I remember everything about you," Marcus replied quietly, the words carrying weight that made Emma look up from her journal with interest. The drive to Johns Hopkins took them through neighborhoods that ranged from gentrified historic districts to areas showing signs of urban struggle and renewal. Emma provided running commentary from the back seat, noting architectural details and asking questions about the city's history, with the same curiosity she brought to everything else. Johns Hopkins Hospital rose before them, like a medical cathedral, its buildings sprawling across multiple city blocks with the kind of institutional grandeur that spoke of decades of healing and hope and human drama. Sarah had researched the hospital extensively, knew its reputation and statistics, but seeing it in person drove home the reality of what they were attempting. This was where miracles happened. It was also where miracles failed. The pediatric oncology wing was designed with children in mind. Colorful murals covered the walls. Comfortable seating areas provided spaces for families to gather, and the staff moved with the kind of purposeful gentleness that came from years of working with sick children and terrified parents. Dr. Martinez was younger than Sarah had expected, perhaps 40, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the confident bearing of someone who had dedicated his life to fighting childhood cancer. He knelt to Emma's level when they were introduced, speaking to her directly rather than over her head to the adults. "You must be Dr. Emma," he said solemnly. "I've heard you're an expert on octopuses." "I am," Emma replied with equal seriousness. "Did you know that they're incredibly intelligent and can solve complex problems?" "I didn't know that, but it sounds like they have something in common with my favorite patients, Doctor," Martinez said with a smile that included Sarah and Marcus. "Shall we go to my office and talk about how we might be able to help each other?" The next 3 hours were a blur of examinations, consultations, and detailed explanations of the experimental protocol Emma would be entering. Dr. Martinez and his team were thorough and honest, explaining both the potential benefits and the very real risks of the treatment they were proposing. The protocol involves a combination of targeted chemotherapy and immunotherapy, designed to help Emma's own immune system recognize and attack the cancer cells, Dr. Martinez explained, using visual aids and simple language that included Emma in the conversation. It's showing promising results, but it's also more intensive than anything Emma has experienced before. Sarah listened with the focused attention she'd developed over months of medical appointments, asking questions about side effects, success rates, and contingency plans. Marcus took notes on his phone, capturing details that Sarah might miss in the emotional complexity of the moment. Emma sat between them, holding both their hands, listening to discussions about her body and her future, with the remarkable composure that continued to amaze everyone who met her. "When do we start?" Emma asked when Dr. Martinez finished his explanation. "Monday, if that works for your family. We'll admit you Sunday evening so we can get you settled and start the prep work." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "That gives me the weekend to explore Baltimore and write in my research journal. I want to document everything about this experience." Dr. Martinez smiled, clearly charmed by his new patient's scientific approach to her own treatment. "I think you're going to teach us all a thing or two, Dr. Emma." As they left the hospital that afternoon, Sarah felt the peculiar mix of relief and terror that came with having a concrete plan. The experimental protocol offered hope, but it also meant subjecting Emma to treatments that were by definition unproven, with side effects that could be severe and outcomes that remained uncertain. "How are you feeling about all of this?" Marcus asked as they walked through the hospital parking garage. "Like I just committed to letting them use my daughter as a science experiment," Sarah replied honestly, "and grateful that we have the chance to try." Emma was quiet during the drive back to the house, processing the day's information with the thoughtful attention she brought to everything important. That evening, she wrote extensively in her journal, documenting her impressions of Dr. Martinez and his team, her understanding of the treatment protocol, her feelings about beginning what she called the final battle against the bad cells. Marcus stayed for dinner, cooking pasta with Emma's assistance while Sarah reviewed the stack of paperwork they'd received from the hospital. The domestic normalcy of the scene, Marcus teaching Emma how to properly drain pasta, the two of them debating the optimal amount of Parmesan cheese, felt both natural and surreal. "Marcus," Emma said as they were cleaning up after dinner. "Yes? Are you going to stay in Baltimore while I'm getting better?" Marcus glanced at Sarah, a question in his eyes that she couldn't quite interpret. "Would you like me to?" "Yes. Mom needs someone to take care of her while she's taking care of me, and I think you need us too." The observation, delivered with 8-year-old directness, hung in the air between them. Emma had seen something that the adults were still dancing around, that Marcus's involvement in their lives had become more than professional obligation, more than charitable interest. "I think you're right," Marcus said quietly. "I think I do need you both." That weekend passed like a dream, a brief interlude of normalcy before the intensity of experimental treatment began. They explored Baltimore's Inner Harbor, visited the National Aquarium where Emma spent hours studying the octopus exhibit, and walked through Federal Hill Park with its panoramic views of the city and harbor. Marcus seemed determined to give Emma experiences to sustain her through the difficult weeks ahead, arranging a behind-the-scenes tour of the aquarium's marine research facilities, and connecting with a local marine biologist who spent an hour answering Emma's increasingly sophisticated questions about cephalopod intelligence. "She's remarkable," Dr. Patricia Wong told Sarah as they watched Emma examining preserved specimens with intense fascination. Her questions showed genuine scientific thinking, not just curiosity. "Have you considered enrolling her in advanced science programs?" The question hit Sarah with unexpected force. Dr. Wong was talking about Emma's future as if it were certain, as if recovery and growth and educational opportunities were givens rather than desperate hopes. "We're focused on getting through treatment right now," Sarah replied carefully. "Of course, but afterward, this child has the kind of mind that could make real contributions to marine science. You should start thinking about how to nurture that gift." Sunday evening arrived too quickly, bringing with it the transition from hope to action. They packed Emma's suitcase with careful precision, comfortable clothes for hospital days, books for the long hours between treatments, the stuffed octopus that had been her constant companion since diagnosis. The hospital room was private and comfortable, with a view of the city that Emma immediately claimed as perfect for watching the world continue its business, while she focused on getting better. The nursing staff welcomed them with the kind of professional warmth that came from years of shepherding families through similar journeys. "This is Dr. Emma," Sarah introduced her daughter to the evening nurse, a young woman named Kelly whose smile was genuine and reassuring. "She's here for the experimental protocol with Dr. Martinez's team." Kelly knelt beside Emma's bed, meeting her at eye level. "I've heard so much about you, Dr. Emma. The whole unit is excited to have such a distinguished colleague joining us." Emma giggled, delighted by being included in the medical team's professional banter. "I'm looking forward to learning about the treatment from the patient perspective. It's important scientific data." As visiting hours ended and Sarah prepared to leave Emma for the night, the first time they'd been separated overnight since the diagnosis, both mother and daughter fought to project confidence neither entirely felt. "I'll be back first thing in the morning," Sarah promised, tucking Emma's favorite blanket around her shoulders. "I know, and Marcus will make sure you eat dinner and get enough sleep," Emma replied with the same authority she used when discussing octopus behavior. Marcus waited in the hallway, giving mother and daughter privacy for their good-night ritual. When Sarah emerged from Emma's room, her composure finally cracked. "I can't leave her here alone," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "What if something happens during the night? What if she's scared and I'm not here?" Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her with the same steadiness he'd shown throughout their entire Baltimore journey. "She's not alone, Sarah. She's surrounded by people whose only job is taking care of her. And she's the strongest kid I've ever met. She's going to be fine." They drove back to the townhouse in silence, both lost in thoughts about what the next few weeks would bring. The experimental protocol was aggressive, designed to attack Emma's cancer with everything medical science had to offer. It would require 3 weeks of inpatient treatment, followed by several months of outpatient monitoring and maintenance therapy. 3 weeks of not knowing if the treatment was working, if Emma's body could handle the assault, if their desperate gamble would pay off. At the house, Sarah moved through the evening routine mechanically, checking messages from work, reviewing the next day's schedule, trying to focus on practical details rather than the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Marcus made tea, the simple domestic gesture somehow more comforting than any words could have been. They sat together on the living room couch, the weight of the day settling between them like a physical presence. "She's going to fight harder than anyone expects," Marcus said quietly. "I know. That's what scares me most. How hard she'll fight, how much she'll endure because she thinks that's what I need her to do." "You've never asked her to carry your hope, Sarah. Emma fights because that's who she is, not because she thinks she has to for your sake." Sarah leaned against Marcus's shoulder, drawing comfort from his certainty about Emma's character and motivations. "What happens if this doesn't work?" The question she'd been avoiding for weeks finally found its voice, heavy with implications neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his arms tightening around Sarah's shoulders. "Then we'll face that together too. But Sarah, you have to believe this is going to work. Emma needs you to hope as hard as she's fighting." "I'm trying. Some days hope feels like another full-time job." "Then let me help carry it. That's what people who love each other do. They share the weight." The words hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been building since their first night at the gala. Love wasn't something Sarah had planned for, wasn't part of the careful strategy she'd developed for getting Emma through treatment, but it was here anyway, complicated and inconvenient, and absolutely real. "Marcus," she began, but he shook his head gently. "You don't have to say anything tonight. Just let me be here with you. Let me help however I can." They fell asleep on the couch together. Sarah curled against Marcus's chest while he stroked her hair with gentle repetition. For a few hours, the fears about experimental treatments and uncertain outcomes faded into the background, replaced by the simple comfort of not facing the darkness alone. The next morning brought the first day of Emma's new protocol, and with it, the beginning of the final phase of their long journey toward healing or heartbreak. Dr. Martinez's team moved with practiced efficiency, starting Emma's treatment with the kind of careful monitoring that spoke to both the promise and the risks of what they were attempting. Emma faced each new medication, each side effect, each uncomfortable procedure with the same scientific curiosity she brought to everything else. "This is fascinating," she told Sarah on day 3, her voice slightly hoarse from the treatments but her eyes bright with interest. "I can actually feel my body fighting differently, like all my cells got new instructions." Sarah marveled at her daughter's ability to find wonder, even in the midst of medical procedures that would terrify most adults. Emma documented everything in her research journal, turning her treatment into a study she could conduct and control, rather than something being done to her. Marcus visited every day, bringing books and small gifts, but mostly just being present in the way that had become essential to both Sarah and Emma. He learned the rhythms of the hospital, when Emma would be most energetic, when the side effects typically peaked, how to navigate the complex emotions that came with watching someone you love fight for their life. 3 weeks later, as Emma's inpatient treatment phase concluded and they prepared to transition to outpatient monitoring, Dr. Martinez called them into his office with news that would change everything. "The preliminary results are extraordinary," he began, unable to suppress the excitement in his professional demeanor. "Emma's response to the protocol has exceeded our most optimistic projections." Sarah felt the world tilt around her, hope and disbelief warring in her chest. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means the treatment is working. Her latest scans show significant reduction in cancerous tissue, and her blood work indicates that her immune system is successfully targeting the remaining cancer cells." Emma sat between Sarah and Marcus, holding both their hands, listening to words that would reshape her future. "Does this mean I'm going to be okay?" Dr. Martinez smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "Dr. Emma, I think you're going to be more than okay. I think you're going to get to study all the octopuses you want." The room erupted in tears and laughter and overwhelming relief, months of fear dissolving into something that felt almost too good to be real. Sarah pulled Emma into her arms, both of them crying and laughing simultaneously, while Marcus stood beside them with tears streaming down his face. 3 months later, as they prepared to return to Chicago with Emma in complete remission, Sarah found herself standing in the townhouse's small garden, watching Emma read her marine biology textbook in the same spot she'd claimed on their first day in Baltimore. Marcus appeared beside her, slipping his arms around her waist from behind, in a gesture that had become natural over the months they'd spent building a life together around Emma's treatment and recovery. "Penny, for your thoughts," he murmured against her hair. "I'm thinking about how different everything is from what I expected when we first came here," Sarah replied, leaning back against his chest. "I thought we were just fighting for Emma's life. I didn't know we were also building a future." "The best futures are the ones you don't plan for," Marcus said quietly. "They're the ones that grow out of dangerous love and impossible hope." Emma looked up from her book, studying the two adults with the perceptive gaze that had always seen more than her years should have allowed. "Are you two going to get married?" she asked with typical 8-year-old directness. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Marcus just laughed, the sound rich with joy and possibility. "That depends," he said, his eyes meeting Sarah's in a question that carried the weight of everything they'd shared and survived together. "What do you think, Dr. Emma? Should I ask your mom to marry me?" Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important scientific questions. "I think," she said finally, "that would be an excellent research outcome." Sarah turned in Marcus's arms, seeing her own love and hope and certainty reflected in his green eyes. Around them, Baltimore hummed with the sounds of a city continuing its ancient work of healing and growing and nurturing the dreams that make life worth fighting for. "Ask me," she whispered, ready finally to believe in futures that stretched beyond the next medical appointment, beyond the careful management of hope and fear that had defined her world for so long. Marcus smiled, the expression that had first drawn her to him that night at the gala, when he'd seen through her desperation to the woman and mother who had never stopped fighting for what mattered most. "Sarah Martinez," he said, loud enough for Emma to hear, formal enough to mark the moment as the beginning of something new and wonderful. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," Sarah replied without hesitation, the word carrying the weight of dangerous love and impossible hope, and the kind of courage that creates families from the most unlikely circumstances. Emma cheered, abandoning her book to launch herself at both of them, creating the kind of group hug that marked the end of one story and the beginning of another. Later, as they walked through Federal Hill Park one last time before returning to Chicago, Emma asked the question that had been building in her mind since Dr. Martinez had declared her treatment a success. "What do we do now? Now that I'm better, now that we're going to be a family. What comes next?" Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances over Emma's head, both of them recognizing the profound shift from survival mode to the luxury of planning for the future. "Now," Sarah said, squeezing Emma's hand, "we get to find out what normal looks like for the three of us. Will normal include trips to aquariums and marine biology camps, and maybe someday visiting the ocean to see octopuses in their natural habitat?" Emma asked hopefully. Marcus laughed, the sound carrying across the harbor like a promise. "Dr. Emma, I think our version of normal is going to include more adventures than you can imagine." As they stood together watching the sun set over Baltimore's harbor, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with one night, one desperate conversation, one impossible request for help. It had grown through shared fears and borrowed hope, through the kind of love that made people fight harder than they ever thought possible. Now it was becoming something else entirely. A family built not on chance or convenience, but on the conscious choice to care for each other through whatever challenges and joys lay ahead. Emma pulled out her research journal, making notes about their plans for returning to Chicago. Her observations about how different she felt now, compared to 8 months ago. Her theories about what their new family dynamic might look like. "One more entry for the Baltimore adventure," she announced, writing with careful precision. Conclusion: sometimes the most important scientific discoveries happen when you're not looking for them. Sometimes the best families are the ones that form around the impossible things, the ones that grow out of hope and love, and the courage to believe in miracles. Sarah read over Emma's shoulder, marveling once again at her daughter's wisdom and perspective. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." "It's also scientifically accurate," Emma replied with satisfaction. "The data supports the hypothesis that we're going to be very happy together." Marcus pulled them both closer, his voice warm with laughter and love. "Dr. Emma, I think that might be the most important research conclusion anyone has ever reached." As they walked back toward the townhouse, preparing for their return to Chicago and the beginning of their new life together, Sarah felt the profound peace that comes from knowing you've fought the right battles, made the right choices, and emerged not just intact, but transformed by the experience. Emma skipped ahead of them, her energy and enthusiasm a visible reminder of the miracle they'd all been part of creating. She was healthy, she was brilliant, she was loved beyond measure, and she had a future full of octopuses and marine biology, and all the adventures an 8-year-old genius could dream of. Behind her, Sarah and Marcus walked hand in hand, building plans for weddings and adoptions and the complex logistics of blending their lives in Chicago. They talked about houses with gardens for Emma to read in, about family vacations to places where marine life could be studied up close, about the foundation work they might do together to help other families facing similar battles. But underneath all the practical planning was something simpler and more profound, the recognition that they had become a family in the truest sense of the word. Not because of legal documents or shared genetics, but because they had chosen each other through the worst possible circumstances and discovered that their individual strengths made them stronger together than any of them could be alone. The flight back to Chicago was filled with Emma's excited chatter about returning to school, seeing Mrs. Chen and her teachers, showing her friends the research journal that had documented their entire Baltimore adventure. She sat between Sarah and Marcus, holding both their hands during takeoff, her face pressed to the window as they rose above the city that had given her back her future. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly to Marcus as Emma dozed against her shoulder somewhere over Pennsylvania. "For what?" "For seeing us that first night, for caring enough to get involved, for becoming the person we didn't know we needed." Marcus smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from Emma's sleeping face. "Thank you for letting me be part of your dangerous love story." "Our dangerous love story," Sarah corrected. "All three of us." As the plane carried them home to Chicago and whatever came next, Sarah reflected on the impossible series of events that had brought them together. One night at a gala, one conversation with a desperate mother, one decision to care about strangers who quickly became family. It was, she thought, exactly the kind of story Emma would appreciate, full of unexpected discoveries, remarkable outcomes, and the kind of scientific precision that came from hearts that knew exactly what they needed to survive and thrive. The plane touched down at O'Hare as the sun was setting, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and promise. They were home, all three of them, ready to begin the next chapter of their story together. Emma woke up as they were gathering their belongings, stretching and yawning before looking out at the familiar cityscape with bright eyes. "We're home," she announced with satisfaction. "And we brought our family with us." Sarah laughed, the sound rich with joy and possibility. "Yes, sweetheart, we definitely did." What did you think of Sarah's incredible journey from that desperate night at the gala to building an unexpected family? Which moment touched your heart the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers. Don't forget to like this story if it moved you. And make sure you're subscribed because we have so many more incredible tales of love, hope, and the courage to fight for what matters most. More amazing stories are coming your way.